program is underwritten by Perfected Claims, supporting access to justice for its clients and employment opportunities in the Virgin Islands community since 2021.
The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
On this episode of Come to the Territory, we'll go one-on-one with Attorney General Gordon Rhea to explore how he's tackling some of the territory's most pressing justice-related issues. Doctors are sounding the alarm about dangerous shortages at the territory's hospitals as the governor rejects calls for a state of emergency. We'll have the details. With demolition on hold at LBJ Gardens, neighboring homeowners are calling for fair compensation while considering buyouts and purchase offers from the Housing Finance Authority. We'll explain. Plus,
I will introduce the amendment that addresses every issue raised.
After an initial veto, Senator Bolques Jr. recently presented a new version of his domestic violence bail reform bill, and he says this one addresses the governor's concerns. We'll have more, and later, this week's panel joins the conversation to analyze these stories and more. Come to the Territory starts now. Welcome to Come to the Territory. I'm Marcelina Ventura Douglas. Sworn in 5 months ago, Attorney General Gordon Rhea, a seasoned litigator with more than 40 years of experience, is working to strengthen the Virgin Islands Justice Department, from filling critical vacancies to improving coordination across law enforcement agencies. Here's more.
It is with great pleasure and confidence that I nominate Attorney Gordon Rhea to serve as the next Attorney General of the United States Virgin Islands.
The governor's nomination of Attorney Rhea came last April following multiple leadership changes at the Justice Department, including the firing of former Attorney General Denise George at the end of 2022 and the abrupt resignation of her successor, Ariel Smith, after just 8 months on the job. During his confirmation hearing, Attorney Rhea laid out specific needs within the Justice Department.
3 items stand out. First is the urgent need to fill numerous vacant positions. Second critical need of the department is an IT case management system that will eliminate the need for paper files, expedite the exchange of data with the police, federal prosecutors and defense attorneys, and alert prosecutors that court filings are coming due. Finally, I plan to step up the training programs for our attorneys.
Rhea also assured lawmakers that he would prosecute public corruption.
How will you ensure the government and its officials are held accountable?
Well, first, if any government officials are caught doing anything illegal or corrupt, I will prosecute it. There's no question about that, and I've made that clear. We've been, as I said, looking to expand our white-collar criminal division.
The Department of Justice was also working to address the lack of a functioning morgue on St. Croix. According to Rhea, who told lawmakers he was working to secure a site for the department's modular morgue.
So that's what we're having to do on St. Croix right now, and it's a terrible situation. I make no excuse for it. It's one I met and one I'm trying to end, is that bodies that need to be examined by medical examiners forensically have to be sent to St. Thomas, and that's costly.
Joining me on set to discuss how he is approaching some of the territory's most pressing justice-related issues is Attorney General Gordon Rhea. Welcome to Come to the Territory, Attorney General Rhea.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, I want to start with what you found when you first took office. I know you started as acting Attorney General before being sworn in 5 months ago. You know, what stood out to you the most about the state of the Virgin Islands Justice Department, and what are your priorities to strengthen it?
Well, the state of the department was mixed. In many ways, it felt like it needed to have a lot of areas lifted up. It was obvious that there was a need for more training. It was obvious that there was a need for a better case management system. And it was also became obvious fairly quickly that it was very important to build stronger and better relationships with sister agencies such as the Virgin Islands Police Department, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the courts, and with the defense bar, because even though we're often on, virtually always on opposite sides, we need to exchange information and we need to work together to reach results. So those were the big areas I looked at.
Now, there is somewhat of a public perception that cases aren't moving forward here in the Virgin Islands or that convictions aren't being secured. Speak to me a bit about what the conviction rate looks like for the Attorney General's office right now, and what should the public expect within the next 2 years under your leadership?
Well, that's a multifaceted question. First, I was very concerned about the case backup because we have a huge number of cases as you go back several years. They just weren't moving. And so what I've been trying to do is to get cases re-examined, particularly the old ones. Are the witnesses still around? Are the cases still triable? And then either dismiss them if they're not triable or work out resolutions if they're weak. And of course, if they're still triable and still strong, then take them to trial. That's been very, very helpful. We've been having meetings continually with the Public Defender's Office to sit down with the defense attorneys and go through the cases that are coming up for trial to see if they can be resolved before the trial in ways that will be both positive for the government and positive for the defendants and for the society. I'm not a person who feels like everybody who commits a crime has to go to jail, particularly younger people, people involved in nonviolent offenses. Often need help. And there are diversionary programs and various systems that can be set up. I've been very much behind doing that and have been pushing hard to get some of those going so that we can hold over basically a wrongdoer's head potential prosecution. But if they get anger management or drug treatment or whatever it might be that they need, or even if they finish school and do some job training, then they can plead to a lesser offense or whatever. So it depends upon the circumstance. But I view it, a Justice Department is to do justice, not just put people in jail.
Yes. Now, how does that work? I know one of the things that you noted also too is a staffing shortage. So yes. How does that tie into getting that expedited as well? That's been tough. We still do have quite a staffing shortage. Our trial attorneys are, well, there aren't enough, to put it mildly, as well as our backup staff, et cetera. So we've had to do the best that we can with what we've got. But what I've tried to do is to make things more efficient. We brought down, for instance, a team of trainers from the National Association of Attorney Generals, which is a nationwide organization, so that our attorneys could get modern, up-to-date trial technique training. And I'm very content with what that training turned out like. And I think our staff now is much more up-to-date, much more up to national standards. To make things more efficient, I've been working to put into place a modern case management system so that the attorneys won't have to scrawl everything down that nobody can read. It'll all be done electronically, and we'll be able to keep track of new cases, old cases, et cetera. So there's a lot of systemic changes that I'm trying to put into place. We're just completing a contract with a company that does that nationwide for attorney general's offices across the country. So we're going to be up to national speed in that area as well. I've also been very interested in securing good relationships with the police department and with the other agencies that I mentioned. Mario Brooks, the police commissioner, is of the same mindset. We speak frequently, we get together frequently and talk through different problems, and we've been holding meetings with the various police detectives, officers, et cetera, and our prosecutors, so that we can all talk about what's working well and what's not working as well. Okay. We're now starting to draw the fruit is starting to ripen. It's looking better. It's a real process. But what we're doing at this stage is we're managing to resolve a lot of cases. As a matter of fact, we're now resolving more cases that are coming in, which is a very positive way for a prosecuting agency to be. Yes. Well, thank you for that.
I could go on, but
yes,
there's a lot that's happening.
We do have a lot to cover.
A lot.
Now, at the governor's press conference last June, announcing the resignations of former OMB Director Jennifer O'Neill and former Police Commissioner Ray Martinez, you said that your office would assist the U.S. Attorney's Office and you would open your own investigations into departments to make sure that everything was running smoothly. I believe you said, quote, you want to join them in the investigation to help in any manner appropriate, and then, kind of make sure to sit down with those department heads. Are those investigations happening and are they still ongoing? Like, should we see things on the horizon?
Yes, quite a bit. First, I've met frequently, again, with Delia Smith, the U.S. Attorney, her criminal chief, Michael Connolly, and we've developed what I feel is a very good working relationship. I'm again having been a former federal prosecutor myself for many years in Washington, D.C. and down here in the islands, I'm very comfortable working hand in hand with the feds, and they can bring a lot to our cases. For instance, white-collar crime, which involves the kind of corruption you're talking about, often is a very expensive type of thing to pursue because it requires forensic analysis of everything from phones to all kinds of evidence. That's extremely expensive. The feds, by our working in partnership with them, can bring in the FBI, the ATF, and the various federal agencies and get that kind of work done for us that otherwise could never be done. And so those partnerships, I think, are critical. And yes, we are doing everything that we can do to assist the federal government in its investigations. And we're also looking to bring cases together in partnership wherever there's a federal relationship to a case so that they can properly get involved with us.
Yeah. And I know we often talk about public corruption when it comes to government, but I think one of the things that you also noted was also focusing on the private sector when it comes to white collar as well too. Speak to me about those initiatives.
Right, and we have a white collar division. Unfortunately, it isn't complete. Again, staffing issues. We have one attorney who also has other things that she's doing, who's heading it up right now. And we need a good forensic investigator and others. But by working in conjunction with the police, which also has a good economic crimes investigation unit, we've been able to bring a series of cases. As a matter of fact, during this past during the past 6 months, we have filed something like 15 white-collar type cases. And we've also resolved, I think it's 7 or 8 of those kind of cases. Often with white-collar cases because they involve thefts of money
yes.
in one format or another. Often the result is to have the offender obviously make the victim whole
yes.
by getting the money back and then serve some other penalty.
Okay. Now, I want to switch to the status of the morgue situation on St. Croix. When can residents expect to see that be resolved?
I believe, and I've made predictions before that have not come to pass, but I believe we will see a morgue in place and operating and open by August of this year.
Okay.
What we have done is, I met this problem when I came in as
yes.
AG, and it's taken a lot of work, but we have a site cleared and ready to go. We've been working with the Department of Public Works, who's approved the plans that we've got. And we've also been working with a company, Vesta, that does this sort of thing, and that contract is almost finished. The components of the morgue, the modular components, are being held right now out at the port on St. Croix. They're ready to be moved to the site as soon as that site is put into shape.
Okay.
And it's our plan, and it looks like a reasonable expectation that all of that can be done hopefully by the 1st of August.
Okay. Now, we've seen a pattern with whistleblower lawsuits recently. We have Lucy Nunez versus the Department of Finance, Stephanie Berry versus the Housing Finance Authority, Peter Chapman versus UVI. And while not all of these cases falls under your office, can you explain to the public what constitutes as a violation of the Whistleblower Act?
A whistleblower is generally someone who's an employee of an agency who blows the whistle, basically goes to the authorities and says, I think there's something going on wrong here. Sometimes they can actually report a wrongdoing, or sometimes it's reporting the suspicion of a wrongdoing. That's what a whistleblower is. They're blowing the whistle on this. We have a whistleblower act here in the U.S. Virgin Islands that's similar to ones found across the country. And that's to give people who blow the whistle protection. Basically, our whistleblower act says that if you do tell the authorities about wrongdoing where you're working, if you report it, you cannot be penalized by your employer. You cannot be fired, you cannot be demoted, you cannot be penalized in any way. And so people who are ready to blow the whistle, please come forward. You're going to be protected, and it's against the law for your employer to ignore that statute. And if they do, we will go after them for that as well. So we can't bring white-collar cases unless people come forward and are willing to testify, be witnesses, and tell us what's going wrong.
Can you speak to whether or not there are currently any whistleblower cases that are currently under your review? Maybe against the government, employees, any type of things like that.
I can't really comment on ongoing investigations or cases in any detail for obvious reasons, but I can say that yes, we are looking at a few of those, and most of them would fall under the white-collar rubric.
Okay. Now, you previously said that the Department of Justice had been conducting a special investigation through its Special Investigation Division, a thorough investigation into former CAHS track coach Bruce Smith and the sexual abuse matter. Now, specifically looking into whether or not school officials were involved, had knowledge of the abuse, and had condoned it in any way. Now, can you speak to us without providing, of course, intimate details, like you said? Where does that investigation stand today?
Okay. And again, I wish I could, but I can't tell you any details about the investigation because it has not yet completed, but it's very near completion. We've had our Special Investigation Division, and actually the chief of that division has been in charge of this investigation, really digging in deep to find out who knew what, who failed to take action, and why. And I predict that we're going to see some concrete results come from that.
Okay.
One thing that this whole episode also has led to is a change in the civil statutes, and I was a big supporter of this. There was a 2-year statute of limitations for victims to bring claims against people who were victimizing them.
Yes.
And that's tough in sexual abuse cases because often people aren't ready to talk about the sexual abuse that they underwent until many years have passed, much more than the law currently permits. So I was a big supporter of the change in that law so that people could bring charges and civil cases against wrongdoers anytime that they were ready to come forward. And I think that was a positive thing that really was spurred and has come out from the Bruce Smith
matter. Yes. Now, I want to ask you, where do you hope in the next 2 years? What do you hope under your tenure? What do you say to those in the public, to the community, as far as who may be a bit skeptical, as far as seeing changes in the Justice Department? What do you say to them that you hope your legacy will be as far as making substantial changes in the Justice Department?
Well, I hope my legacy will be strong. I'm not a spring chicken. I've been around for a while. As a matter of fact, I turned 80 this year.
Well, happy belated birthday.
Oh, thank you very much. And I know most people my age are out playing golf or watching TV all day. That's just not me. I felt that this was an opportunity for me to give back to the Virgin Islands, where I've been practicing law for over 40 years, and to bring to the Department of Justice the experience I gained as a prosecutor in Washington and as a prosecutor down here and as a defense attorney. I've been defending criminal cases here for many years before I came back into prosecuting. And I think I can bring to this job a balance that can make a real difference. And I'd like to leave behind at the end of my time, which I believe will be in a little less than 2 years.
Yes.
I'd like to leave behind a Justice Department that cares about justice, that wants to see wrongdoers imprisoned if necessary, or helped if that's possible, and that can help make our island a safer and better place.
Right. Well, Attorney General Rhea, I want to thank you so much. I know that we can continue this conversation. I'm sure that there's so much more, but are there any final words that you'd like to say to the people?
Well, I would just like to thank the people for having given me this opportunity, and I'd like to thank the governor as well. And all I can promise to do is to do my very, very best to honor and fulfill this opportunity. So thank you.
I want to thank you for being so accessible as well, too. I think it's very refreshing to have the AG be accessible and speak with the media as well, too. I truly do appreciate you being here today.
Well, I also believe in openness when it can be done. And we've been doing also, I just might mention, not only various appearances on TV or whatever, but also some town hall meetings. Had two about 2 weeks ago, one in Frederickstead, one in Christiansted. We're going to be doing them on St. Thomas and St. John. And I've been joined in those by Commissioner Mario Brooks and some of the senators and others. And I think that's important for the community to have a chance to see us, hear us, and also tell us what's on their mind.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Coming up, we'll hear from this week's panel. But first, here's a look at the topics up for discussion. Urgent alarms are being raised at both of the territory's hospitals about severe shortages in staff, supplies, and funding, with doctors warning that patient care is at risk and calling for immediate action. At Wong Louis Hospital, 28 physicians recently sent a letter to Senator Ray Fonseca, chair of the Senate Committee on Health, Hospitals, and Human Services, asking for $17.6 million for critical supplies, new hires, and vendor debt. They described a year and a half of financial turmoil, driven by declining government funding, delayed payments, and a rise in uncompensated care. The letter says the hospital is short by 30 physicians, with 3 emergency department shifts this month having no doctor schedule, and nearly half expected to go uncovered because 2 ER doctors recently resigned. At Snyder Regional Medical Center, 79 physicians described similar conditions in a March 31st letter to Fonseca. They reported shortages in the emergency, maternal child health, anesthesia, internal medicine, and surgery departments. The letter says supplies have run out, including urinals, diapers, IV tubing, and lab equipment, and moderate and high-risk surgeries are now being referred elsewhere. The letters prompted Fonseca to renew his calls for a hospital state of emergency.
If the governor declared the state of emergency, then he will have the full authority to tap into various sources of funding, all sources of funding within the government as appropriate.
The legislature have the money, they need to do their job. Senator Fonseca has access to over $130 million of funds that were garnered by the administration from all the Epstein lawsuits. If the hospital needs money, just give them the money. There's no need for a state of emergency, just for the Senate to appropriate the money. Even if I call a state of emergency, I can't spend any of the money because the legislature passed a law saying that even in a case of emergency, we can't spend $130 million. That don't make any sense.
Bryan also called for accountability from hospital leadership, referencing the over $20 million they received from the American Rescue Plan Act.
We gave the hospital over $20 million in cash from ARPA, but at some point, they're going to have to make the executive at the hospital face facts and be accountable for the work that they're doing. They got the money and they decided to spend it all in raises, and now they're having to come year after year and pay those raises, making the budget inflated for the hospital and it harder to do. Yes, we need healthcare, but what about the management of the monies?
Senate President Milton Potter has scheduled an emergency session for April 14th to consider a funding bill with strict spending rules and oversight. Residents of these homes in LBJ Gardens must soon decide whether to accept offers from the Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority to buy their properties or stay in the homes as VIHFA moves forward with plans to demolish its abandoned housing community nearby.
What about compensating us for all the stress and all the emotional damage, all the emotional distress that they have caused us? Not only emotional distress, but also the health hazards.
VIHFA temporarily paused its demolition project after its contractor began tearing down buildings earlier than planned and before residents could be notified. That's what agency officials told lawmakers during a February 20th Senate hearing.
Saturday or so, he began to work and immediately stopped. We had already had in position to begin the Monday information to the public to say, hey, this will begin with a date, time, etc. So that is what I mean when I said the contractor got ahead of our notification.
We continue to find ourselves with these unforced errors. I believe that there's an opportunity for us to be able to address our community, our constituency well before it hits the fan.
VIHFA recently announced it had held an in-person meeting with LBJ Gardens residents to address housing safety concerns stemming from the demolition and had identified funds to cover two options for a path forward. According to Nakia Kiernan, VIHFA's Director of Communications, the options include a buyout, which requires collective community agreement and would require the properties to convert to green space, while the second option is an acquisition, allowing VIHFA to purchase the properties without full community participation, and would require future mitigation and possible redevelopment. The property valuations will follow an appraisal. Residents have until April 28th to express their interest in writing, though Kiernan clarified this is not a deadline for making a final decision.
In direct collaboration with the Department of Justice and the Virgin Islands Police Department, I will introduce the amendment that addresses every issue raised.
After Governor Albert Bryan Jr. vetoed his original bill to establish mandatory minimum bail amounts in domestic violence cases, warning it would unfairly penalize the poor and remove judicial discretion, Senator Angel Bolques Jr. reworked the legislation. He presented the new version at an April 3rd Senate hearing, emphasizing that it now addresses the governor's concerns.
Bill number 36-0005 now, through its amendment, eliminates mandatory minimum bail amounts and instead requires courts to assess the defendant's actual risk to the victim and the community. It also allows for full secure bail only when there is a clear and convincing evidence of danger or flight risk, thus restoring and respecting judicial discretion. It also empowers the court to consider non-monetary release conditions such as electronic monitoring, house arrest, or mandatory check-ins when financial hardship is demonstrated.
Bolques said victims and law enforcement would have a voice in bail decisions, and all defendants would have access to court-approved domestic violence intervention programs. Supporters of the bill included the Women's Coalition of St. Croix and the Family Resource Center on St. Thomas, both pointing to rising domestic violence cases and calling the bill a critical step forward.
It strengthens community trust in the justice system, signaling that domestic violence will not be tolerated and that victims will be supported at every step.
Attorney General Gordon Rhea also supported the bill.
I urge this esteemed body to pass Bill number 36-0005, which underscores our commitment as a community to protecting victims of domestic violence and holding offenders accountable.
The bill was approved by the Senate Committee on Homeland Security, Justice, and Public Safety, and now heads to the Rules and Judiciary Committee before facing a final vote in the full Senate, and once again, the governor's desk. Joining me on set to analyze these issues is former Senator Donald Ducks Cole. Welcome back to the show, Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being here.
Joining the show from our St. Croix studio is attorney Key Walker, founder and managing attorney of Walker Legal, and Cletus Emmanuel, a public school teacher and longtime community advocate. Thank you both for joining us. Before we explore the issues of the day, I want to turn to you first, Attorney Walker. As a defense attorney who works regularly with prosecutors in the Department of Justice, you've seen about 4 attorney generals under this administration, to include the acting appointments. What impact, if any, has this turnover had on the office, in your opinion? And ultimately, what would you like to see from prosecutors to keep cases moving efficiently?
You know, the Department of Justice, particularly in St. Croix, struggled from before this administration took over. I think there's been a turnover of maybe 3 now attorney generals. I don't think it's any different than the prior administration that also experienced a turnover in attorney generals. I am very optimistic about this Attorney General, however. Although he has limited time to try and turn the office around, it's clear that the procedures that he's putting into place are systematic procedures and systematic change that hopefully will improve the office overall. I understand that the office is understaffed. I think that the prosecutors also appear to be overwhelmed. But for my practice, what I would love to see is earlier resolution of some of these cases. My concern for the community is that some of these cases are pending for 3 years, 4 years. You hear about people going to trial 7 or 8 years after the charges have been filed against them. And I think that's a real disservice to the community.
Yes. I want to turn now to the situation facing our territory's hospitals. Mr. Emanuel, Senator Ray Fonseca is now pushing hard for a hospital state of emergency. But just last year, as chair of the Senate Committee on Health, Hospitals, and Human Services, he held no fact-finding meetings on the crisis at Wang Louis Hospital from April through the end of the year, even as the CEO and the top financial officer had resigned and the hospital was facing ongoing turmoil. Why do you think now we're seeing this level of action?
I think in the past, you heard a lot of people talking about the issues, not just at Wang Louis, but also at Schneider Regional. Now, the fact that because the physicians wrote this letter, I think they're taking the situation more seriously. But we've heard those concerns before. And in the past, we've tried to fix the problem. A lot of times we threw money at the problem without trying to solve the underlying bottom of the problem. But just throwing money at the problem will not fix it. We have to find out what the problem is and state the problem and try to find solutions rather than just throw money in that hole. We've heard issues at Wang Louis from staff members, but now the physicians are coming out. I think we take the physicians a lot more seriously.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Cole, the governor allocated $20 million in ARPA funds to the hospital, and he's now arguing that the money should have been managed more efficiently to prevent the crisis that we're seeing today. Mr. Emanuel just spoke about how, these are crises that has been ongoing. We've been seeing this. We've been hearing about this. Do you think the governor is right in his logic?
Well, I think the governor, to the point where he spoke about the legislature's role in managing an oversight over the hospital, I think he has a point. The governor saying he said $20 million. I don't know if those monies were specifically earmarked for a specific purpose, or was it the use of the hospital, and maybe they determined that it would have been spent in this particular capacity rather than what the governor presumes it should have been spent on. I don't know if they were dedicated. I know the governor had been sending money to different departments from ARPA funds, sent a lot of money to WAPA to pay for phone, pay for light, supplies, water, and fuel supplies. He sent money all over the place. I don't know whether or not they would specifically earmark. The thing I want to say about the legislature abdicating its responsibility in overseeing the hospitals is that we know that one of the major concerns at a hospital is uncompensated care. And uncompensated care should have an appropriation. Every year they come down because we have a public hospital, we admit everybody, we don't turn anyone away. So you have people who come into the hospital who are unable to pay for the service. How is that going to happen? The legislature needs to figure out what the cost of uncompensated care over a fiscal year.
Yes.
If it's $50 million, you got to find the money and appropriate the appropriate amount of monies for uncompensated care. Until you deal with that issue of uncompensated care, we're going to be having the same problems. People coming in, getting service, and can't pay. And that's a problem. That's the major problem.
That is a major problem, but we also are talking about management as well, too. Do you not think that management has a role to play in what we're seeing today?
Absolutely. Management has a role to play, but management can only manage what they have. If you don't have money, you have to determine, am I going to pay for blood? Am I going to pay for laundry supply? Am I going to pay for this? How am I going to attract individuals to come to attract and keep, not just attract and keep nurses, doctors and all that. How am I going to do that? So you have to be able to allocate resources where they're necessary. If you're not getting uncompensated care, and I will harp on this all the time, when I served in the legislature, uncompensated care had to be taken care of because it had to be there. These people don't have insurance. They don't have access to capital.
Yes.
They come in and we have to serve them. We can't turn them away. So how are we going to send the government, send monies to the hospital?
Yeah.
The legislature need to identify, that's the job of the legislature, to find funding to run the hospital. And management would come in, but you can't manage what you don't have.
Yes. Attorney Walker, speaking of management, given your past role as the chair of the board at the Wang Louis Hospital, how serious is this crisis and what are the risks if immediate action isn't taken?
The hospitals are always in crisis. This one may be more serious than the usual crisis that the hospitals are always in. And of course, there's going to be harm to the public if it's not addressed. I agree with both Mr. Emanuel and Mr. Cole to an extent. Uncompensated care is a huge issue, but at the end of the day, no one has ever defined it. And that's the problem, because the hospitals say that uncompensated care is one thing. And, those of us or those people who are responsible for appropriating funds or identifying funds are also defining it differently. The issue with the hospital is the design of the structure of the hospital. And I'm talking about the legislative structure. It's unclear to me why these two hospitals have not been collapsed into one system with one executive management team. It's unclear to me why we haven't created enough clinics in the communities to lessen the burden of the hospital that's not only doing emergency surgery, that's not only responding to major trauma incidents, but is also acting as primary care to a huge segment of our community. These issues have never been addressed. And until they're addressed and until people make the tough decision to say, listen, we don't need two executive management teams for this small population that we have, the hospital is going to constantly be coming to the legislature, to the executive branch, needing 20 million, 30 million, 40 million. And every 2 years or so, we're going to get the same letters that we're getting now from the physician.
Mr. Cole, I want to go back to you. Senators are getting ready for this emergency session to approve new hospital funding. In your view, what kind of limits or safeguards do you think that they should put on the money to make sure that it's really going to urgent healthcare needs?
Well, they have to be able to, if they have to line item, they should have a list of what the hospital is asking for. We need to pay for labor, we need to pay for laundry, we need to pay for medicine, we need to pay for blood, and allocate the monies directly to those particular instances, because we're talking about management. If the management is not done with the monies that they receive, we're at the same place that we started. So the legislature should have a list, and I believe that the hospital has provided a list to them as to what their needs are in terms of payment.
Yes.
And they need to be able to say, listen, $10 million for supplies, $5 million for this, and $5 million for that, and allocate and line item that so that it can be allocated. That's the only way it's going to be done, because if management isn't spending the money how it's supposed to be spent in the place it's supposed to be spent, then the legislature has to do that through line item.
Attorney Walker, do you agree with that sentiment that there needs to be line item? How do you think those restrictions should look?
I do agree that it should be line item, but I think if the legislature is going to take the time to have an emergency session, they should also discuss long-term solutions. Because again, the legislature is going to have to do what it's doing again, year after year after year. One of the things that the physicians are asking for is a lump sum amount of money so that they can staff up. That's all fine and well, but you got to pay for that staff next year, the year after that, and the year after that. And if you haven't come up with the solution to relieve the burden of uncompensated care, to merge the hospitals into one system, which is a very easy thing to do, if you don't come up and implement any solutions, we're going to be in the same crisis over and over, and we're going to get to a point where the entire government will not be able to afford to save the hospitals, and then we will all suffer.
Yes. I want to move now to LBJ Gardens on St. Croix, where residents are being asked to weigh their options for the future of their homes. Mr. Emanuel, How much responsibility do you believe the Housing Finance Authority bears for the confusion and the frustration residents are feeling in this process right now?
I think they already knew what their plans were, and I listened to the press release that they had out. If you have your contractor moving forward, moving ahead of schedule, somebody told them to move ahead of schedule. I would bet, but having such a demolition throughout the community, we know that we were going to cause some issues there. Right now, people's system, their waters are contaminated, and we're trying to find a solution. And the solution they're proposing, I don't think is a good solution. I think the HFA have everything to all of the blame to bear. I don't know how we're going to be able to move those. Let's assume all those residents decide we're going to sell. With the price of rent in St. Croix and the lack of rental units, where are we going to find houses to house these people? And you're trying to pay them appraised value for their property. Can you imagine if people have to move in a rental unit, having to pay, and then taking the remainder of that money to build? How long will it take to build, or even buy a house? Will they have enough money to replace the property that they're relinquishing to via HFA?
Yes.
I don't think it's fair to them. I think it was ill planned, and now that the stuff hit the fan, they're trying to backpedal. But I really think either way you look at the two solutions they give, it's not going to be fair to the residents.
Yeah. Attorney Walker, how concerned do you think residents should be about the possibility of low appraisals, especially given the conditions surrounding LBJ Gardens? I know while it might be close to the water, close to the beachside and everything, it is still an industrial area. And if a low appraisal does happen, is it realistic that they'll even be able to afford a home, just as Mr. Emmanuel just spoke about, to now leave homeowners, people who have no mortgages, to now be in a position to possibly become renters or now paying a mortgage?
I mean, they would have to find the best formula to determine a fair buyout. And an appraisal may not work because of the condition of the surrounding area, especially since they've now demolished, or at least started to demolish, the housing community next door. So it would appear to me that there needs to be some sort of formula created that is maybe agreeable to the parties. This is a dispute. And, I'm hoping that the VIHFA and the homeowners can enter into some form of mediation where they can arrive at an arrangement that they will all agree to. I think that's the best way to resolve this. I'm hoping that the homeowners retain counsel, not to necessarily sue or go after VIHFA, but retain counsel to advocate on their behalf to negotiate the best resolution possible for the homeowners.
And I think that is something that Senator Maurice James has advised residents, is to get a lawyer for that real estate transaction. But given the damage that's been reported and the concerns raised by residents, what do you see as the next step for them in the process?
If it were up to me, I would recommend mediation. I would recommend that the homeowners band together, retain counsel, and enter into negotiations with VIHFA. It's the benefit to the entire public to resolve this issue. Whether they improve that area, whether the homeowners stay, or whether the homeowners leave, there's definitely a benefit to the entire community to take down LBJ, to replace it, and to develop that area if that is possible. So I do think that a mediation is the best way to look at this. And I think, hopefully they can come to some resolution, because the homeowners, of course, to be made whole, would need to be relocated into homes that they own with no liens, no mortgages, nothing attached to it. That, you would have to put them in the best similar situation to the one that they had and were experiencing in that area already.
Yes. Mr. Emmanuel, VIHFA says the plan is to turn the area into a green space, but given the prime location, isn't it right to speculate that this land could possibly eventually be marketed for private development?
And that's the problem we have. You realize we were talking earlier, and you were talking about returning back to St. Croix, and first thing Attorney Walker asked you is if you have a view. And lots of us in the Virgins take a view for granted. And in that area, the view is nice. And I think that's prime real estate. And I think if you move those people, my fear is that we're moving our local land homeowners out of those type areas, and later on we're selling or developing for other people to benefit. And so I think it's unfair. It's unfair to the homeowners over there. It is unfair if they take those properties and they're saying that they're not going to take it by eminent domain, which is good. They're not going to force anybody. But can you imagine if they took that property and then later sell it to a private developer that developed that land and sell those maybe condos and sell it for top dollar? That would be unfair to these people. I think at the end, the residents are going to lose either way unless you plan to really, just like Attorney Walker say, put them in a property that is equal or better.
Yes.
And if you pay them just for appraised value, they're going to be losing, and they're going to be losing immediately and later on, because they don't have to find a place to stay. You can't just buy a house tomorrow and you can't build right away. So you're going to have to probably rent. You've already paid for your house if you've been there 30, 40 years. And it's going to be unfair to them. So it's just sad to see that's happening the way it's happening. Again, I don't think the two solutions are the best. We need to explore some more as to what a better solution would be. And you talk about the formula.
Yes.
We need to find a better formula that would be more equitable.
Okay. Mr. Cole, now I know this might be happening to a neighborhood in St. Croix, but I want to ask you, the residents spoke about calling for compensation, not just for his family's property, but for stress, emotional distress, and health concerns. Do you think that needs to be a part of the conversation as well?
Yeah, we need to be able to put a value on the property, and a value that goes with time certain. You've been there for 20 years. I mean, you put your blood, sweat, and tears into this property. I agree with what Attorney Walker and Mr. Emmanuel spoke about. You need to be able to get an attorney, a real estate attorney, so you can sit down and look at these variables within that structure. You're not going to take it by eminent domain. So if you're not going to take it by eminent domain, then I can stay there. But staying there, you're going to have problems. Mr. Emmanuel spoke about the cistern water that is contaminated. All of those environmental impacts that are there has to be taken care of by the Housing Finance Authority. I believe they made a mistake by starting to demolish without even allowing these individuals to look and see what is going on. They need to have an attorney to go in and sit down and assess all, not just the real estate that's there, but the timing grade that's been there, the view. I like view. And if you're seeing the water, how are you going to assess the value as it pertains to the view?
Yes.
I believe that they themselves need to come together and get an attorney so they can sit down and negotiate with the Housing Finance Authority.
Yeah. Well, we're shifting our focus now to Senator Angel Bolques Jr., who made key changes and reintroduced his domestic violence bail reform bill. Now, in vetoing the bill the first time around, the governor argued that the mandatory bail amounts could unfairly penalize people because they're poor. Attorney Walker, could this be seen as prioritizing criminal fairness over real victims? Or should the concern be, as victim advocates have said, how easily some perpetrators can pay low bail and walk free?
I did not interpret the governor's veto language to prioritize criminal conduct over victim rights. Essentially, what the governor said is you're taking away the discretion from the judges to assess and determine what the right bail amount is. And in actuality, when you review the amendments proposed by Senator Bolques that passed committee, it's actually already law. The judges have always had discretion to set bail. While there's been legislation on the books that may recommend a minimum amount for something or language here or there, ultimately the judges already determine whether the defendant is a risk to the community, whether the defendant's still a risk to the victim, whether the defendant is a flight risk. That's been part of our system for centuries when you're looking at bail determinations in both the federal system and the local system. So the amendments that Bolques proposed addressed the concern that was raised by Government House But it's really still the status quo because the discretion should lie with the judges, and that's essentially what the amendments allow for.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Emanuel, in vetoing the original bill, going back to what the governor said, it didn't address the root cause of violence and instead penalized poverty. But is it realistic to expect a bail reform bill to tackle the root causes that we're seeing when it comes to domestic violence? And, what would it really take to address the rise in domestic violence in our community?
Well, let me first, before I respond to that, let me just comment on what Attorney Walker said. You're the attorney here. When I read that amendment, I said, well, we're already doing that. The judges already have that discretion to determine what circumstance will require if a defendant get bail or if they have to go through a program or whatever. So when I read the amendment, I was like, well, it doesn't make much sense to me. That's already happening. Now, the problem with domestic violence and why we would like to take care of the problem, sometimes you have a domestic violence issue and the person is out and they cause harm to the victim. So we're not necessarily looking at the root cause of the problem or solutions. We're just looking at the problem and trying to find immediate solutions. We probably need to have more, not just having that victim go through those programs, but maybe having the family, because we're sometimes we're not talking about the damage that's done to the children in such situations. So we really need to look at the problem holistically rather than just looking at, well, person X beat up his wife or her husband, and we arrest him or her, and we ask him or her to stay away from the other person. But we need to look at the effect on the children. We need to look at why this happened. Because sometimes, we say when poor people, sometimes when they're in a situation, your emotion gets the best of you when you're financially strapped. And maybe we need to look at family, and when I say family, I'm looking at work-related, financial-related solutions where husband or wife can be more comfortable financially, that they refrain from such behaviors, or have a whole family. What's the word I'm looking for? Have family counseling rather than just having counseling for the victim or counseling for the perpetrator. Have a family-oriented counseling sessions where we begin to not just say, well, lock him up or lock her up, but let's deal with, okay, we lock him or her up, but let's go back and try to solve the problem.
Yes. Mr. Cole, how effective do you think legislation can be to address root causes? I mean, we have Attorney Walker saying, maybe judges already kind of have this discretion already. With the amendments that we're seeing here, how effective do you think it's actually going to be to really make an impact in the cases that we're seeing of domestic violence incidents here in the territory?
When I look at legislation is put in place basically for deterrence, right? We're going to deter this behavior that has been happening. And then you have a judge with discretion. After an act has been committed, it's before them for adjudication. And then the judge uses discretion, but basically I don't know what's in the judge's head, because you don't know what's in the head of the perpetrator.
Yes.
Okay? Oh, this guy is a nice guy, he did this, and then go back out, and next thing you know, somebody's dead. Deterrence and enforcement. You have to be able to enforce whatever you say. If you say you're going to have to stay home, you have to stay home. You have to have monitoring. That has to be done. Enforcement and deterrent. That's what legislation is for. And I like the bill. The bill was the Attorney General,
yes,
who spoke on the bill, said he likes the bill.
Yes.
The advocates like the bill. And I believe that the amendments that were placed there, as Attorney Walker said, address the concerns of the governor, where you give discretion to the judges to do that. So, me personally, you and I, you're you, I am me, And I ain't putting my hand in you, I ain't putting my hand in nobody, and nobody should put no hand in me.
We should be keeping
either.
our hands to ourselves.
All right.
Attorney Walker, just as a criminal defense attorney, what is one of the things that you want to see to hopefully address root causes, talking about, addressing it? We have even Dr. Clemma Lewis testifying, saying that this is something that's generational as well, too. What do you think needs to be implemented to address those root causes outside of legislation?
There's this misconception that domestic violence is man on woman. Domestic violence also includes, women to men. It also includes, what parents may be doing to their children, what children are doing to their parents. It also includes sibling violence. Or sometimes you just have a group of people living in a household, and it also includes that. So as far as deterrence, or as far as addressing the root cause is concerned, fund the Women's Coalition and other similarly related organizations that can help protect victims. Because what happens when you go to a bail hearing is that the government puts their position on the record and the defendant gets to put his position on the record. And when you're a senator and you're issuing legislation, you're doing that from the halls of where you work. You are not seeing the case-by-case basis that the judges are seeing. And we also have to remember that judges are nominated by the governor and approved by the legislature, which means that we have determined that they are suitable and appropriate individuals to make these discretionary decisions. So there are times where you have people claiming domestic violence and no domestic violence occurred. You have people that claim domestic violence to gain an advantage in, let's say, a divorce or a custody battle. And you have to allow judges to have the discretion to hear both sides at a bail hearing, render an analysis, and make a decision. When you want to address the root cause of something, you go into the schools and you talk about violence. You fund the Women's Coalition, you fund the Men's Coalition, you make more anger management classes available to people. You address the stressors that might be leading to violence, not just domestic violence, but just violence in general in our community.
All right. And that's all the show we have for you today. Be sure to tune in next Sunday at 1 p.m. for an all-new episode of Comes with the Territory. In the meantime, for your news updates, tune into the WTJX newsfeed on weekdays at 5 p.m. on 93.1 FM or by downloading the WTJX app. I'm Marcelina Ventura Douglas. From all of us here at WTJX TV Channel 12, take care.
The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
Closed captioning of this program was underwritten by Perfected Claims, supporting access to justice for its clients and employment opportunities in the Virgin Islands community since 2021.